जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद हिज डिवाइन ग्रेस एसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी शिल प्रभुपाद की जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की नामाचार्य हरिदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर युवासती गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्यामकंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की नवदीप मायापुर धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की गंगा माई यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की समवेत भक्त वृंद की गौर प्रेमानंदे all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So today we are reading from Canto number 3, chapter 23, verse number 1 to 3. So we will be beginning a new chapter today. So I'll be just reciting myself 1 and 2, just 3 will recite it together. Maitreya uvacha nirvedavadinam evam manorduhitaram munihi dayaluhu salinam aha shuklabhivyartam smaran. Translation. Recalling the words of Lord Vishnu, the merciful sage Kardama replied as follows to Swayambhuva Manu's praiseworthy daughter Devahuti, who was speaking words full of renunciation. Rishir uvacha ma khido raja putri tham atmanam prati anindithe bhagavamste ksharo garbham adurat samprapachyate. The sage said, "Do not be disappointed with yourself, O princess. You are actually praiseworthy. The infallible Supreme Personality of Godhead will shortly enter your womb as your son." Just a short purport for this. Kardama Muni encouraged his wife not to be sorry, thinking herself unfortunate, because the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by his incarnation, was going to come from her body. So this one we will repeat together. Dhrita vritasi bhadram te Dhrita vritasi bhadram te Dhrita vritasi bhadram te Dhamena niyamena cha Dhamena niyamena cha Dhamena niyamena cha Tapodravina danaischa Tapodravina danaischa Tapodravina danaischa Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhaja Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhaja Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhaja Dhrita vritasi bhadram te Dhamena niyamena cha Tapodravina danaischa Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhaja Dhrita vritasi bhadram te Dhamena niyamena cha tapodravina dhanaischa Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhaja. Tapodravina dhanaischa Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhajam. Dhritavritasi bhadram te Dhamena niyamena cha Tapodravina dhanaischa Shraddhaya cheshwaram bhajam. Dhritavrtasi, you have undertaken sacred vows. Bhadram te, may God bless you. Dhamena, by control of the senses. Niyamena, by religious observances. Cha, and tapaha, austerities. Dravina, of money. Dhanaihi, by giving in charity. Cha, and Shraddhaya, with great faith. Cha, and Ishwaram, the Supreme Lord. Bhaja, worship. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. You have undertaken sacred vows. God will bless you. Hence, you should worship the Lord with great faith through sensory control, religious observances, austerities, and gifts of your money in charity. In order to spiritually advance or to achieve the mercy of the Lord, one must be self-controlled in the following manner. He must be restrained in sense gratification and must follow the rules and regulations of religious principles. Without austerity and penance, and without sacrificing one's riches, one cannot achieve the mercy of Supreme Lord. Kardama Muni advised his wife, you have to factually engage in devotional service with austerity and penance, following the religious principles and giving charity. Then the Supreme Lord will be pleased with you and He will come as your son. Thus ends the purport. Om Ajnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmitam Ena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So today we are beginning a new chapter, chapter number 23. So the name of this chapter is renunciation of Kardama Muni. 24, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's chapter 24. So in this chapter, basically, Kardama Muni, places Devahuti, Mother Devahuti, with a son, and eventually he will renounce her, and he will take sannyas. So that's basically the essence of this chapter. And in the beginning, basically, this is a conversation between Kardama and Devahuti. So this is advice Kardama Muni is giving to Mother Devahuti, where he is basically telling, hence you should worship the Lord with great faith through sensory control, religious observances, austerities, and gifts of your money in charity. So essentially, Kardama Muni is encouraging or advising his wife Devahuti to practice or to perform renunciation and austerities. So that is a subject for today's discussion. And in the purport also, Prabhupada mentions that actually, in order to advance in spiritual life, one must control his senses. And such controlling of senses and penances and sacrifices will actually please the Supreme Lord, and which will help for one to acquire the mercy of Supreme Lord. So that is why Kardama Muni is advising his wife to do so. So basically, we will be discussing two things in today's class. The first thing, what pleases the Supreme Lord, and the role of renunciation and austerity in Bhakti Yoga. So let me ask you a question. So how many of you here believe that renunciation and austerity will please the Supreme Lord? How many of you believe so? Can you raise a hand? Like, how many of you believe that renunciation and austerity will? Okay. And the other question is that how many of you think that cultivation of renunciation and austerity is must in Bhakti Yoga? Does anyone disagree? Maybe if those who disagree can raise hand. Oh, you disagree that one. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so let me first start with a pastime from Lord Chaitanya. As we all know, when Lord Chaitanya was there, he was performing the Sankirtan movement, right? He was chanting and dancing on the streets of Navadvip and many other places. But whenever Lord used to perform Kirtan, Lord used to perform Kirtan on the streets. At the same time, Lord also used to perform a private Kirtans in the house of Srivas Thakur, called Srivas Angan. And for that private Kirtan, not everybody is invited. It's only the devotees, the confidential devotees of the Lord are invited. And Srivas Thakur used to make the decision, like who can attend and who cannot attend. So he is a decision maker. So one day, a Brahmana, a local pious Brahmana, approaches Srivas Thakur and says that basically he wants to attend this private Kirtan of Lord Chaitanya, and he says that this brahmachari is actually a very austere brahmachari. He's very renounced brahmachari. And basically he only drinks milk. He doesn't eat anything. He only drinks milk. And he convinces Srivas Thakur, saying that, see, this brahmachari, he's not a sinful person. He's a very pious person. Right? So why don't you accommodate him so that he can attend Lord Chaitanya's, Kirtan? But, after, some discussion, Srivas Thakur finally agrees to do so. But he says that, but do not be, in the front, like, so that everybody can see you. Just go back and hide somewhere. So you can witness it, but at the same time, people doesn't know that you are here. And in doing so, basically, the Lord Chaitanya arrives along with his other, associates, and the Kirtan begins. And the Lord Chaitanya was like, started his Kirtan and dancing wildly. And at some point of time, Lord Chaitanya stops. And he says that, I'm not feeling the same ecstasy as I used to feel every day. Something is wrong. Srivas Thakur, tell me what happened. Then Srivas Thakur, he was very afraid. And he basically tells that, see, there's nobody sinful person in this house. Everybody in this house is a very pious person. Okay, but that doesn't answer the question. Is there anybody else whom I'm supposed to know? Then Srivas Thakur introduces his brahmachari, and he says to Lord Chaitanya that this is the only additional person who was present today. And he tells Lord Chaitanya that, but just keep in mind that this person is a very simple person. He's very austere, he's very renounced, he's a, sinless person. And Lord Chaitanya says few things. That's very interesting. He says, Paya pane kabu more kahe nai paya. No one can attain me simply by drinking milk. And he says, Chandala o mohara sharana yadi laya sneha mora munitara janiha nischaya. Know for certain that even if a Chandala surrenders to me, he is mine and I am his. And he says, Sannyasa o mori yadi na laya sharana sneha mora nahi satya balilum vachana. That even if a sannyasi who does not surrender to me, he is not mine. This is the truth I am telling you. So this is from the Chaitanya Bhagavat. Basically, where apparently it looks like even though renunciation and austerity is something which should please the Lord, but in this pastime it looks to be exactly the opposite. The Lord Chaitanya is not really pleased by this austerity and renunciation of this brahmachari. And instead, Lord Chaitanya stresses on the principle of surrender, right? If one surrenders, even a Chandala, right, he's very dear to me. But if one is not surrendered, even if a person is very good in austerities and renunciation, even if he's a sannyasi, that he does not belong to me. So this is a very interesting point. And the Lord Chaitanya makes one more point, which is very interesting. And he quotes a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto. So this is Uddhav Gita, right, in the 11th canto, where Krishna says, My dear Uddhava, by association with my pure devotees, one can destroy one's attachment for all objects of material sense gratification. Such purifying association brings me under the control of my devotee. So this is the answer. This is the answer to the question, what pleases the Lord? Right? One may perform the Ashtanga Yoga system, engage in philosophical analysis of the elements of nature, material nature, practice non-violence, or other ordinary principles of piety, chant the Vedas, perform penances, take to the renounced order of life, execute sacrificial performances, and dig wells, plant trees, perform other public welfare activities. Give in charity, carry out severe vows, worship the demigods, chant the confidential mantras, visit the holy place, or accept major and minor disciplinary injunctions. But even by performing such activities, one does not bring me under his control. So, in this way, basically the Lord is only pleased by the devotion. And this is how one can bring the Lord under his control. So, but now one may ask, why is that? Why is only Lord pleased with devotion? Because we can see there are so many suffering people in this world, and so many people are praying, right? Why is not the Lord is not merciful unto this suffering soul? Does it mean that the Lord is insensitive? That Lord is not answering to the suffering of the conditioned soul, right? So one can ask that question. And is the Lord harsh that he does not understand the suffering of this material, the living entities in this material world? Actually, the answer is actually no. The reason is because, first of all, we must understand that the Lord is transcendental. He is adokshada. So anything which is material cannot influence him, either be it suffering or happiness. Both are something which is material. And the Lord being the transcendental, how can the Lord who is transcendental can be influenced by something which is material, right? So that is what this verse is trying to say. Basically, you can do so many things, but at the end of the day, basically, they're all just material. They're not spiritual. So something material can never, ever please the Lord. So, but now someone can ask, so does it mean that the Lord is unaware? That the Lord is unaware of the sufferings of this material world? So the answer is no, the Lord is aware, but however, for us to please the Lord, one has to perform devotional service. It's only through devotion that one can actually please the Lord. That is why if you see, the devotees, actually that is why if you see the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, it is actually Gadadhar Pandit, no, Advaita Acharya, who prayed for the Lord to appear, seeing the suffering of these conditioned souls, right? So it is actually the devotee who can actually feel the suffering of this material world because he's in the material world, and he praises or he prays for the Lord. So that is why actually the prayers offered by the devotees are very powerful, because the Lord basically reciprocates with his devotees. And the devotees are so merciful that they're actually moved by the suffering of the conditioned soul in this material world. So that is why for us to actually get the mercy of the Lord, it is very much important that we actually please the devotees of the Lord. And that is how one can actually please the Lord. That is why here it says, what does it say? By association with my pure devotees, one can destroy all attachment for the objects of material sense gratification. Such purifying association brings me under the control of my devotee. So this is how one can actually please the Lord, not by simple suffering, right? And actually, see this the reason why I made this point is actually because the Mayavadis make this point where they say that when the Lord appears as an avatar, basically he comes under the influence of material nature, because the Lord is basically coming, right, to reciprocate in this material world, right? So that means that for the Lord to be reciprocating with this material world, that means that he has to be covered by the material nature, right? So that is why Mayavadis say that the Lord, when he comes as an avatar, basically he is covered by Maya. But that is not the right understanding. That even though the Lord comes, basically he is not coming because of some material suffering or some material cause. No, that is not the reason. And there are two reasons which we can offer in this regard. The first reason is that when the Lord appears, he appears only through his internal potency. Esha prapanna varado ramaya atma shaktiya. Atma Shakti basically means that his transcendental potency. He does not basically cover by this material potency. So this is actually a prayer offered by Lord Brahma before when he was trying to creating the universe, where he says the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is always the benefactor of the surrendered soul. His activities are always enacted through his internal potency, Rama, or goddess of fortune. And the Lord appears not to fulfill any of his unsatisfaction. It's not that the Lord is coming because he's kind of unsatisfied with something, so he's coming to satisfy his desires. No, it's not like that. That is why here it says, Nityancha Purna Kamasya. Basically, this is a verse, basically Lord Narasimha speaks to Prahlad, where he says that I am actually fully satisfied eternally. It is not that I'm coming because I'm dissatisfied and I'm coming to satisfy my senses. No, I'm actually fully satisfied. But I take various births in order to actually fulfill the desires of my devotees. So tell me, what is your desire? So in this way, the Lord is basically coming in his own original potency, and he's not covered or he's not influenced by any material energy. And when he comes, basically the reason he's coming is simply to please his devotees. And there is no other reason for the Lord to appear. And actually, this is one beauty of Bhagavatam, that even though we study many pastimes, like, Prahlad Maharaj pastimes, Kardamuni's pastimes, there is always a consistency of the message, right? So even though you can see Kardamuni and Devahuti's pastimes is primarily, by yoga, right? Because they're performing Ashtanga yoga, but the essential message is always bhakti. That is why, this message is always throughout consistent. Like in the previous chapter also, we can see Mother Devahuti. She's exactly praying the same thing as Lord Brahma was praying. She says, association for sense gratification is certainly the path of bondage, but the same type of association performed with a saintly person leads to the path of liberation, even it performed without knowledge. So here we can see Mother Devahuti also, even though she is actually following the process of Ashtanga Yoga, but again she stresses on the association of a pure devotee, which is basically essentially a principle of Bhakti Yoga. So this is how we can see that how the message of Bhagavatam is consistent in all the pastimes, and how the principles of Bhakti are same, no matter what pastime are we trying to study. It's always the same. Okay, now let's go back to the question. Okay, so now we are saying that in order to please the Lord, basically we need the mercy of the devotees, and we need to have the association of the devotees and serve them even without knowledge. So then what is the role of renunciation and austerity? Right? As some of you raised the hand, right? Like there's no need, or renunciation and austerity is not a must in Bhakti Yoga. Right? So we will try to understand that. So first of all, we must understand, is renunciation and austerity, are they limbs of bhakti? As you all know, there are 64 limbs of bhakti, right? Is renunciation and austerity, is it a limb of bhakti? For example, if you see Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there are 8 limbs, right? There are 8 limbs of this yama niyama, right? Where Patanjali clearly says that austerity and renunciation is a limb of yoga. You cannot be a yogi if you're not a renunciant. That doesn't make any sense for Patanjali. Now, when it comes to Bhakti Yoga, is renunciation and austerity is one of the integral limb of Bhakti or not? And if not, then how is it understood or applied in Bhakti Yoga? And on top of that, why is Kardama Muni recommending Devahuti, right, to perform renunciation, austerity, and penances? Now we will try to study that. So I'll quote some verses of Prabhupada from few of his works. So this is actually from the preface of Nectar of Instruction. In all spiritual affairs, one's first duty is to control his mind and senses. Unless one controls his mind and senses, one cannot make any advancement in spiritual life. Everyone within this material world is engrossed with the modes of passion and ignorance. One must promote himself to the platform of goodness, sattva guna, by following the instructions of Rupa Goswami, and then everything concerning how to make further progress will be revealed. So, as you all know, the Nectar of Instruction is the most important book, and actually Prabhupada says that this is the first book everybody should study. Even before you study any other book, the first book we must study is Nectar of Instruction. And the Nectar of Instruction is full about controlling the senses, controlling the mind, right? And Prabhupada makes it very clear that controlling the mind and controlling the senses is very much important for you or for us to make any spiritual progress in the beginning. There's no doubt about that. And let's look at one more reference. This is actually from Nectar of Devotion, chapter number 2. There are certain prescribed methods for employing our senses and mind in such a way that our dormant Krishna consciousness for loving Krishna will be invoked. As such, as much as the child with a little practice can begin to walk, one who has no basic walking capacity cannot walk by practice. Similarly, Krishna consciousness cannot be aroused simply by practice. Actually, there is no such practice. When we wish to develop our innate capacity for devotional service, there are certain processes which by our accepting and executing them will cause that dormant capacity to be invoked. Such practice is called sadhana bhakti. So here we can see that actually austerities and renunciation itself is not really a cause of bhakti, but actually they are something which are used in the principles of bhakti, especially in the sadhana bhakti, so that one can control his mind and senses, so that one can invoke his dormant Krishna consciousness. Right? So similarly, the principles of renunciation and austerity also can be understood in that way. Because in the 64 limbs of bhakti, if we see, there are some recommendations for austerity, like fasting on Ekadashis, fasting on some festival days, right? So there are some practices of renunciation and austerities, but however they are not recommended as an exclusive limbs of bhakti as something which you practice alone, but that is actually included. And So in this way, basically, just give me a second. Yeah, for example, the fifth limb of bhakti, where it says, Sad dharma pracha bhogadi tyaga krishnasya bhetave, means the fifth limb of bhakti, which says, inquiring from the spiritual master how to make advance in Krishna consciousness. Sixth limb, being prepared to give up anything material for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. That means that when we are engaged in devotional service of Krishna, we must be prepared to give up something that we may not like to give up, and also have to accept something that we may not like to accept. So this is the actual renunciation. I mean, this is how the word renunciation is applied and understood in Bhakti Yoga. And actually this understanding is very peculiar. The reason is because whenever you use the word renunciation, it essentially means giving up. But here actually, he says that renunciation is not just giving up, but actually also accepting. You see the last line here? We also have to accept something that we may not like to accept. So that is something which is very unique about how we practice renunciation in Bhakti Yoga. For example, Prabhupada gives an example of how some sadhus does not touch the money, right? Because sadhu means you're not supposed to touch money, you're supposed to renounce, right? Just give it away. But Prabhupada says no, that I do not have any problem accepting any amount of money, right? That it doesn't mean that I am attached to money. It's not that I am, hankering for money, no. But that does not mean that, if I can use that money in the service of Krishna, that I would reject it in the name of renunciation. So in this way, we must understand exactly how to understand and apply the principles of renunciation in austerity in Bhakti Yoga. Because the same thing is kind of applied differently in different yoga systems based upon what type of yoga system you are trying to follow. So that is why sometimes a question comes that do we need to practice, cultivate knowledge, renunciation and austerity separately, right? Like in the previous class when I gave, Archita Prabhu was saying that you don't have to practice them separately, right? The dormant love is already there, right? Okay, now if someone says, okay, then if the knowledge is already there, then why do we need one more knowledge, right? Already knowledge is there, right? So there has been, so I want to add, this is my last point. Basically, that is why I want to address one fundamental issue of what it means when we say the soul is Satchit Ananda, the soul is already having full of knowledge. Right? What does it really mean? Does it mean that the knowledge is already inherent in the soul, right? Or the soul has to acquire the knowledge? Because that kind of lays a foundation in understanding how we must look at practice in cultivating knowledge, renunciation and austerities in Bhakti Yoga. So this is a verse, so this is a question, is spiritual knowledge inherent in the heart? And I would like to, this is actually this is a verse I was mentioning that I would refer to when Savastru asked this question about the knowledge being inherent in my previous class. This is from the 12th canto, 6th chapter, 40th verse. Shrunoti ya imam sphotam, spute shrotecha shunyadrik. Basically, this 6th chapter is the end of Bhagavatam, where Maharaj Parikshit is leaving the body and basically he's going back to Godhead. And over there Suta Goswami describes how Parikshit Maharaj is leaving the body and how he's getting liberated in an analytical way. That is where he mentions here that this Omkara, ultimately non-material and imperceptible, is heard by the super soul without his possessing material ears or any other material senses. The entire expanse of the Vedic sound is elaborated from Omkara, which appears from the soul within the sky of the heart. It is the direct designation of the self-originating absolute truth, the super soul, and is the secret essence and eternal seed of all the Vedic hymns. So basically this establishes that yes, the knowledge is inherent. It's not that it's not inherent, but it clarifies that where is that knowledge situated? Is that knowledge in the soul or in the super soul? So if you can see, basically here, read this purport carefully, you can see basically that Omkara, which is essentially like a beej or a seed of the Vedic knowledge, is heard from the super soul by the soul. So that is in the super soul. And the purport, the senses of a sleeping person do not function until he has awakened. Therefore, when a sleeping person is awakened by a noise, one may ask, who heard the noise? The word sputes shrote in this word indicates that the Supreme Lord within the heart hears the sound and awakens the sleeping living entities. The Lord's sensory activities always function on a superior level. So in this way, when a soul becomes self-realized, right, so that is when it awakens and acquires this spiritual knowledge, which is in the form of a seed or the Vedic knowledge from the super soul, which is always with the soul. Right. So in this way, basically, we need to understand the principles of austerity, the principles of renunciation, and what pleases the Lord, and practicing the renunciation and austerities without devotional service and with the devotional service, and the role of these principles in order to make advancement in spiritual life. That ends my talk. So anybody has any comments or questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Nirantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.